Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Fireside Chat. This is Fireside Chat 112. Eimear Burke here, where I'm in conversation with a member of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. And as is customary, I start with a prayer for peace. Gomara Shiakon ar fud na crinne, Gomara Shiakon in our Jaili agus in our Jirha, Gunairi Lin, Len ar Cuj Garmaka, Gaumich Buikas Jeev, Jeha Chivdaka, is Spirit Chivdaka. May peace prevail on earth. May peace prevail in our homes and in our countries. May our missions be accomplished. We thank you, guardian spirits and guardian deities, for peace. As the fever of day calms towards twilight, may all that is strained in us come to ease. We pray for all who suffered violence today. May an unexpected serenity surprise them. For those who risk their lives each day for peace, may their hearts glimpse providence at the heart of history. That those who make riches from violence and war might hear in their dreams the cries of the lost. That we might see through our fear of each other a new vision to heal our fatal attraction to aggression. That those who enjoy the privilege of peace might not forget their tormented brothers and sisters. That the wolf might lie down with the lamb, that our swords be beaten into plowshares, and no hurt or harm be done anywhere along the Holy Mountain, with thanks to John O'Donoghue. So you're all very, very welcome. Let me see where you're from. Hi, John from Ardnamurchan. Hello from Sweden. Hello from Holland. Lovely. Canada. Denmark. I know people have been talking about rain. Tipperary, lovely. Wales, North Hampshire. Finland. Great. And a sunny, at least a day, but very chilly London. We started off with sunshine today, but there's been rain. Actually, the sun is shining now. I can see it, although it's cloudy. Hello from Sussex, northern Wisconsin, Maryland, New York, California, Tipperary, Longford, lovely. Oh, and finally in the sunny garden. That's lovely, Sean. Where else? California. Great. So you're all welcome. Again, as I said, let me take you to, we're going to Ireland today. We're going to Wexford. So let me welcome Aidan Dudden. Aidan, you're really, really welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invite.
So you are in Wexford. So I don't know if many of our viewers, apart from the Irish people, will know much about Wexford. So what's your landscape like?
We're down, I suppose, we're down here in what's called the sunny southeast. So by Irish standards, it's sunny, but really it rains half the day, half the time of the year. So, yeah, it's down south of Dublin, down in the corner here. Lots of people are familiar with Rosslea Airport is down here. And we're about 80 miles, I suppose, from Dublin. And yeah, it's grand, it's fine, nice place, you know. So this is where I'm originally from. I was born here, so I suppose like a lot of people, I would have spent a lot of time abroad before coming back here the last couple of years. So kind of from here, but yet new to the parish. So I'm still settling in, and part of the settling in process was kind of signing up with OBOD and finding people in the area that similar out themselves. You know, I suppose my own background is similar to yours, Eimear. I work as a principal psychologist and consulting psychotherapist, so I practice in the area of psychotherapy and psychiatry. So you were just asking about this and the relationship to Druidry. It's, I suppose, it all started for people like myself here in the stream. I trained, it all started with LSD back in 1955, similar to Grant, people know, back in 1953. What happened at that stage was that there was a psychiatrist in the UK, his name was Frank Lake, and vials of LSD began to arrive into his practice. And similar to Groff, he said, "Oh my God, I'll shoot everybody I can find up and stuff." Between 1955 and 1970, he began to discover that when people were actually using LSD, they were beginning to experience out life, specifically
Experience what? You're moving around, so the
experience.
sound isn't good. Can you turn up the volume on your phone? Somebody's
How's
asked
that?
that.
Is that me a bit?
I hope so. Okay. Yeah.
How's that?
If
So
you
he was
don't
being,
move,
yeah.
go on. Sorry.
So he was similar as Groff. He was finding people were beginning to experience early life and the birth, prenatal experiences, especially. And he found that as people began to experience them, began to let go of various trauma from that time, began to feel better. And then, similar to everybody else, as we know, Richard Nixon came along in 1970, decided to make shite of everything and caused absolute havoc, as we all know. And then Frank Lake, along with Groff, along with Ordy Lang and people like this, were faced with the same issue or difficulty. What are we going to do now? So, and these guys all knew each other. Groff and Lang and Lake would have all known each other and would have been on various seminars and all this. So Groff went the way of holotropy breath work, as you know. Frank Lake went the way of floor work, primal work, you down the floor and get on with it. Okay. But in 1972, he was joined by an English lady. Her name is Alison Hunter. And Alison Hunter was basically his assistant, and she did all the floor work in the various psychiatric settings with him. And between then and 1982, they developed all this stuff about primal work and what's called primal integration. And
okay, can you repeat that?
Then,
sorry, can you just repeat what you said? What was it called? It's sometimes hard to
hear. It was called primal integration regression therapy. It's all this primal stuff, same as Yamaha.
So primal, it's hard to hear. Primal integration regression therapy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So Frank Lake died in 1982, but he himself and Alison were part of, I suppose, what was termed back then evangelical Christian stuff. Okay, they were big into happy clappy Christian stuff, and Frank Lake had found an organization called the Clinical Theology Association. Okay, and this is where they used to bring vicars from all over the UK and Scotland and such, and they used to come and learn pastoral counseling. They used to do a bit of floor work, a bit of pre-perinatal work, or primal work, or whatever. And unfortunately, he died in 1982. So Alison was then the most senior person in this organization, and it was full of people who were basically vicars. Okay. So Alison discovered she had a major disability at this stage, and that's that she didn't have a penis. Okay. So they didn't want her to head of this. So she turned around and said, I'm fair enough, I'm leaving. And she came to Ireland. So she came to Ireland, a colleague of hers came to Ireland, and over the next number of years, they developed this primal integration or regression therapy, and they developed what's called pre and perinatal psychotherapy, very similar to Groff's work. So I trained them, and where they ended up was that how a person, they went all the way back to conception. So how a person is conceived, it's how they are in utero, it's how they're born, it's how they live their life, and how they die. And this relates to what our people used to do donkeys years ago, back in the day, where our people and our ancestors recognized the primacy of our conception, because they built a whole monument to ceremonial and ritual celebration of conception. It's called Newgrange, as we all know. So Newgrange then for our people back in the day was a place where you did, if you wished to, you could re-experience your own conception, the conception of the day, the week, the year, and the whole universe. And that was how this stuff came back into Druidry. At the same time, our ancestors, very interesting that our ancestors, as we all do as Druids and all people listening here, would have been big into trees, as we know, and therefore one of the ways you would heal your life back in the day, back in our ancestors, you go, as we know, you go sit in a tree, and the tree accepts you in true acceptance, and you're healed, right? We all know this. And then you also become, one of the gifts of doing with a tree was that it also really grounded you, and then it gave you access to the world below and above and back. And as you went on, obviously you realized worldwide, where the tree is symbolic of the umbilical cord, as we know through many different traditions. And that would have been very much in parallel to what Alison Hunter would have done and what Frank Lake would have done, which they would call the maternal fetal distress, which is how basically your in utero life was. So when our ancestors started with the tree and they realized the tree was symbolic of the umbilical cord, they went on and then they realized that in fact the umbilical cord is symbolic of the tree. And that then allowed a person to be born into a greater version of themselves. So that was kind of what happened in terms of how I got involved in Druidry. I'm part of and shamanism and that sort of stuff. And what happened when Alison Hunter was here is that the bigger picture, although they were very focused on regression, it's like
hold on a second. People are finding it difficult to hear you. And Pat Booker says, this is great stuff, but the sound is still a bit tricky. Can anything be done?
How's that doing? Don't know if that's any better, Eimear.
Yeah, if you just stay there and don't move. It's good. I know, because you're sitting on a swivel chair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
so, anyway, I always hold the phone and move around. That might work actually.
Okay, that actually,
you want to see me?
Yeah. Well, no, we need to see you as well. You can hold it that way. Yes, there've been some comments on your shirt. People like it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, the manufacturer of this shirt is a close kept secret. So Alison would have had the bigger picture, similar as kind of Groff would have had, and they went on.
Get closer to your phone. Just hold it in your hand because people are really keen to hear what you're saying.
Okay. So, can you hear there?
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, we'll keep going. So Alison then continued on, and there's a couple of us involved. And
face your phone. Face your phone.
And in 2018, she died in 2018, and the people who have been associated with her finally kind of fell by the wayside a bit. And then in 2021, myself and others, we celebrated our 30 years. This was our 30 years in psychiatry. In psychotherapy, psychiatry was 2021. And we decided then, after 30 years, that we would sit down and we would do a series of 30 years in psychiatry and what have we learned. Okay? And what we've learned, this is kind of leads back into Druidry again, is what we've learned is that when people have difficulties in life, and we're talking about, difficulties in being in the world, difficulties that you might label as difficulties with relationships or difficult with, anxiety. We're not talking about when we're down the end, we're in clinical depression or schizophrenia or mania. We'll talk about those in a minute. But what we said, okay, what have we learned in 30 years in relation to people who when we fall into the everyday difficulties of life, plus a bit more? And what we've discovered is that worldwide, the model that people use for healing, it's, as we all know, is self-directed worldwide. And it consists of there's two characteristics of it. First, as we know, is that person sits down and goes, I'm in a bit of difficulty here, openly and honestly with myself, what feels appropriate for me? Absolutely central. The second thing that's characteristic of, yes, people are open to listening to others and this sort of stuff, but are absolutely clear that they do not do anything recommended by anybody else unless they actually say, does this feel appropriate? So basically, people who do best in terms of living in the world are people who adopt self-directed living, self-directed healthcare, self-directed healing, whatever you call it. And what this is then is it's an overall framework of how you live successfully. And within that, then you have different modalities of how people heal themselves. And Druidry is a form of modality. So, for example, in the Bardic tradition, you have numerous modalities for healing. For example, you have singing. As we all know, when we all come across, we most likely all know people. I know people who have faced various challenges in life and went off and joined a choir and have absolutely blossomed. Absolutely. And you can feel it off them. You feel the vibrancy within them. They absolutely zing with energy. You then have in the bardic tradition, the telling of stories. People have been telling stories from the beginning of time to rehabilitate themselves. You then have dancing, etc. As we all know, dance is a great way to resolve stuff. But these are all modalities. They're not, for example, they're all modalities in the sense that when a person is in difficulty, if you were to turn around and say to them, okay, in relation to difficulties, I think you should now go and join a choir, they'd laugh at it. They'd kind of go, what the hell are you on about, you know? So that's, I suppose, the distinction that we made. And psychotherapy and various forms of psychotherapy are modalities. They're not a framework for recovery or living. The framework is self-directed. So that was the first bit that we did. Then we began to say, you know, we would kind of look at other areas, and one was understanding schizophrenia and recovery, for example. Schizophrenia, where schizophrenia is where a person adopts a particular beliefs around their world. They invent a delusion where they heal their sense of self. So that's what schizophrenia is. And we did stuff we also.
Sorry, Aidan, can you repeat that, because your sound keeps going? Can you just repeat that, what schizophrenia is?
Schizophrenia is the creation of a false reality to heal the sense of self. Okay, so when a person is going through schizophrenia, what it is schizophrenia is their recovery. So what you have is you have a human being who is basically, we describe these difficulties or challenges usually in terms of trauma, in terms of the self, or in terms of the human energy. Okay, so in terms of the sense of trauma with somebody who is going through the process of schizophrenia, is the person is walking around with a ball of trauma within themselves. For certain reasons, this trauma is usually of such a nature, it's too big. It cannot be addressed fully. It cannot be addressed directly. Okay, we're all familiar with, we organize our world with defense mechanisms to deal with stuff, etc. That's how you do it. But what a system does when it adopts schizophrenia is it heals this trauma by creating a delusion outside of themselves in which they're able to express emotions, two core emotions, which is generally terror and rage. And so basically, Patricia, whenever I ask her, Patricia believes the aliens are coming. Okay? And she's absolutely profoundly convinced, that's it, the aliens are coming. And she's absolutely terrified. And she's, they're going to come and they're going to kill me. And she's absolutely raging that these things are going to come and they're going to get me. And she expresses this over time. And then the trauma itself is discharged to some degree. And then she re-enters ordinary life. And that is the journey through schizophrenia. So
I want to come to you there now, because I'm amazed. I'm not that I'm surprised that you're saying it. I'm interested in how psychiatry recognizes that when they actually interfere with that self-healing process, and they interfere very quickly with medication. So if you're saying, obviously the person needs to be held in some way. So if they're held in an appropriate way, a non-chemical way, that they can emerge from that trauma response back into their own alignment. That's what you're saying? Absolutely.
So when it's possibly a good idea to just give, a slight history of what happened. Psychiatry no longer exists in terms of this. The psychiatry we have today is what's called, as most of you know, is what's called biopsychiatry. And biopsychiatry puts forward that people have biochemical imbalances and they are related to genetics. I have a postgraduate degree in research in psychiatry. I'm really interested. There is absolutely no evidence whatsoever for the existence of biochemical imbalances or genetics. And just to say, just do a little history tour here, if that's okay. And just to say, there are many women and men who are members of OBOT who are members of psychiatric profession and related professions. And when these women and men work in the psychiatric system, and they hold up their heads and they say, "Listen, lads," and this I was talking to a guy, a very senior member of the profession in Ireland, shortly, not a couple of weeks ago, and when a person involved puts up his or her head above the parrot and says, "Lads, I'm not sure about this," it's hard for those of you outside the profession to understand. They're finished. They're literally finished. Their colleagues turn on them. The person's well-being, their health, their mental health. It's very difficult to communicate it. I mean, I was working overseas in a much larger jurisdiction in Ireland, and I came across a team, and there'd be about 15 people in it, and they would be kind of known as people who say, "Listen, and this may not be true." And I came away, and one of the people I came away really concerned for her well-being, because the amount of vitriol that she had been exposed to, both in both privately and publicly, as kind of the person who was seen as the head of this, she was heading for really, really serious ill health, and it's very difficult. So I just want to say that. But how this all began was back in the 1960s. There are conspiracy theories, and most of them are just conspiracies, but this is one which is true and correct. And I just want to say that it's very important that one of the things that our people suffer from is a lack of groundedness when we're coming to talk about these things, and that's just something to deal with. Back in the 1960s, and it parallels Oxycontin in the States, which everybody. Back in the 60s, there were people within some of the pharmaceutical industries who were sitting there, and they sat around their mahogany tables, and they said, "Jesus, lads, there's a heap of money to be made here in psychiatry. But we have to come up with a plan, and the plan is that we must get them to give out our pills. That's what we'll do." So what they did was they approached psychiatry as follows, and they said, "Listen, the deal is, lads, if you give out our colored pills, we'll pay you 7 times the amount of money you receive if you listen." And what many of you won't know is that up until the 1960s, American psychiatry, in particular, was dominated by psychiatrists who listened. You had to be, almost all were also psychodynamically orientated, or Freudian, the fraud orientated stuff. So they said, so that's the first thing they did. If you give out our colored pills, you paid 7 times the amount of money. In Ireland today, the salary of a counsellor or psychotherapist on average is just under 30,000 a year. The salary for a consultant psychotherapist is over 200,000. It's almost exactly 7 times the amount. The second thing that they did when they sat around was they said, "Okay, we'll pay. If you give out these, you're going to earn 7 times the amount of money. And what we'll do is we will also fund all your research. We will fund loads of your professorships of psychiatry. And then every a couple of times a year, you can come down to Caribbean and you have your holiday, and we'll talk about the next colored pill." And that was the trade. It was a trade-off. And then they said to us, "Okay, so all we have to do now is we have to create the narrative of a person who has mental health difficulty has a biochemical imbalance. Because if they're biochemical imbalance, well, then they need our pills." So they set about creating that. And there is no evidence for it whatsoever. So that was when you had this stuff about mental illness. It doesn't exist. There's no such thing as mental illness. There's no viruses, there's no bacteria, there's no genetics, there's no biochemical imbalance. They don't exist, full stop. That's it. What you do have is people who have mental health difficulties. And we are in the situation with biopsychiatry today because of the decisions in the 60s by pharmaceutical companies. And that's it, full stop. All the evidence that we have, even from research funded by pharmaceutical companies, is that people who are given medication do worse than people who aren't. You have side effects. You have a system over time where the whole system becomes expectant of receiving this stuff, and then the person finds it exceedingly difficult. So the goal of the prescription of medication is to make money for big pharma. That's what it's about. And what's happened in our own country over the last 60 years is that tens of thousands of people's lives have just been flushed down the toilet for money. And that's what's happened. And it's tragic. I kind of get upset talking about it. I've sat in clinical meetings with teams, and they're talking about a young man or a young, and I know if they go this way, if you can just push them to go that way, well, maybe we won't intervene with the person going to be all right. But if not, the medication is a pathway to chronicity, and that's it. And no ifs, no buts, no maybes. And that's why today the narrative of mental health difficulties is all about biochemical imbalances. And I remember I was talking to a psychiatric team about this, and I was saying to them, I remember when I started, we used to sit around. We were very interested in what's called the philosophy of science, right? How science works, and sociology of knowledge, which is how knowledge, which is scientific, gets out there as accepted in society. So I said to them, there's absolutely no point in us doing research, right? If you want to do research in mental health difficulties, there are 15,000 psychotherapists and counselors in this country who sit down with men and women every day of the week. Why don't you feckin' ask them? It's called qualitative research. And they'll say, I'll tell you what, my experience and Alison Hunter was 50 years, I'll have to tell you a story about Alison. She was 50 years listening to people. 50 years. If you want to know what it's like being with people, why don't you go and ask a woman like that? And what she'll say is as follows. The men and women and children who come to me recover and move forward from mental health issues when they're respected and listened to. It's not easy. For some people, it's really hard. But it happens when time and space and respect are given. There's your effective research. But they're not interested in it because it's not going to make them any money. And why society in general doesn't want to exist, it doesn't want to listen, it's another question. But I remember when I started out 30 years ago, we would go to psychiatric conferences and get-togethers, right? And it was like an old-fashioned Irish dance, right? With women on one side, men on the other side. No, but never the twain shall ever meet, lads, and rulers from the north and all that shit, right? But in psychiatry, it was all the listeners on the left, all the psychiatrists and related guys who listened were on the left, and the druggy guys were on the right. And the listeners would take the piss out of the others. They'd be there, oi, Johnny, what colour pill are you giving out this week? And they'd literally do that. Okay, that was 30 years. And now when you go to it in Ireland, they're gone. There's no listeners, almost no listeners, nobody. So we now
that's such a pity. Howard was a listener, my husband.
Yeah.
Just really, really interesting. Shaban Kalula is a traditional healer from Tanzania, who's a good friend of mine. It was he who encouraged me to mark the Wheel of the Year ceremonies when I was 10 minutes in Obot. Anyway, we worked with him in Tanzania, and Howard videoed his work. And it's a really interesting, he had this, mother and daughter came to see him, and Howard videoed it. So Howard had his psychiatry hat on, okay, but he was also a therapist. Anyway, he's just videoing it. The woman and the daughter-in-law come. There was a boundary dispute with their neighbor, and they believed that the neighbors had bewitched them. So what they were experiencing were, there was, so they had auditory, if you're looking at it from the psychiatric point, auditory hallucinations. So there's banging on the roof of the house at night, and then whenever they'd walk across their yard, they would be receiving shocks coming up through the earth into their feet. And they both had the same symptoms. They had a baby, obviously the daughter-in-law had a baby, who was very, very disturbed. And the daughter-in-law's husband, so the woman's son, had been framed and he was in prison. And they put this down to the dispute and the bewitchment of the neighbors. So Howard would say, okay, if I'm looking at this with my psychiatric hat, it's folie à deux. You've got two people in the one household experiencing the same symptoms. Shaban was not concerned whether they were bewitched or not. He treated a lot of people with bewitchment. Usually people would come to him and say, I've been bewitched, I want you to send back more bewitchment. He never did that. His was around empowering his clients and to make them strong. So it was really, really interesting. So he asked the woman, the mother, what would make her enemies really annoyed? What would they hate most? And she said, oh, if I was doing well, like if the bewitchment didn't work. And he said, okay. So what I want you to do, I want you to brew some banana beer, which would be a local beer, and I want you to invite them over for beer. Straight away, it's a hospitable act. And he gave her some herbs, and he said, "I want you to put these herbs in, and that'll soften them." But she also worked with them. She got her to put all the anger into a pot, all the horrible stuff into a pot, smash it. Got the daughter-in-law. Wherever she had lots of symptoms in her body. And this would be his way. Was he would make a nick wherever she was experiencing tension or tingling or whatever. And his view was that what it does, it gives you a shock, the pain of the cut, and that knocks whatever vibration is going on in your body. This is his narrative. It knocks it out, and you're out of that rut. And then he'd rub some ointment in to make it sting. And he got her facing each of the 4 directions and kicking out all the badness.
Yeah.
And then, but what did happen, they did make the beer. And 4 months later, he wrote to us to say those 2 were fine. Yeah. And then 3 months after that, we were back in Tanzania and we spoke to the mother. Her son had been released from prison. No more symptoms. Now, at the time, WHO around that time had published a paper. I can't remember where it is now, but they stated that traditional healers, both from Africa and India, had a far higher success rate with what so-called mental illness and psychosis and schizophrenia than modern medicine. So I used to tell my students, a lot of African students in the years, I said, if you go mad while you're here in Ireland, go home and get treated here. So, so there's a lot of, you're getting a lot of comments here. So,
what happens is a number of things from my perspective going on there. The most important thing going on there, from my perspective, is that the people's experiences are meaningful.
That's right.
Within the person's life. Then what this person does is, those of you who have an interest in energy medicine and can understand what's happening and how the energy field is the medium by which the body is the mechanism by which we experience life. Energy field is the medium by which it occurs. So we can absolutely, it is the meaningfulness that is what's central to this. And it's real. It's not made up. It's what's made up is that it's not meaningful.
Yes.
That's what's made up. So people are kind of sitting there, oh God, we'll make up. It's inherently meaningful,
That's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
So what happens? Why I wanted to just do the bit about the history was, it's very important that we're absolutely clear and that we're not drawn into wishy-washy about, maybe it's something to do with this neurochemical this, or it's to do with this, or to do with that biology. We've been going on like that forever. Why don't we actually do what scientists do, which is listen so that we can form hypotheses? That's what we do. And we listen. And if you listen to people who are suffering mental health issues, like if you listen to somebody and just ask them, why do you think you're in trouble? Why do you think you're off the rails here? Well, I'll tell it's always, well, wait and I tell you about my life. It's always that. But the reason I want to mention medication is that when a person just do that bit about is that when a person bottoms out in schizophrenia, okay, schizophrenia is a U-shaped curve. That's the journey of recovery. Schizophrenia is not actually episodic in general. It becomes episodic when you have inappropriate intervention. But when a person bottoms out, and where you want the person to bottom out as shallowly as possible. But when a person bottoms out the lowest that they can, the person's bottomed out when she can no longer park the delusions and have a conversation. Okay? So Patricia, who believes the aliens are coming, it'll all be, oh, Eimear, aliens are coming everywhere. Whether when a week earlier would be, Eimear, the aliens are coming, listen, I need to go out and shop. I need a bit of milk. Listen, can you give me a lift? It's all gone. And the bottom out is coming because the person will begin to use language in a way which is grammatically correct, and you're all familiar with this, but semantically meaningless. And that's the 3-day rule, lads. 3 days from now, our Patricia's going to bottom out. When Patricia bottoms out, she comes out. I'm trying to get to this thing about medication. So let's say Patricia bottoms out, and she bottoms out in my local town, and she goes down to the river, and she rips off all her clothes, and she goes, "The aliens are coming, lads! They're coming! They're coming! They're coming!" And goes on and on. And I say to her, "Patricia, would you mind putting on your runners? There's glass and shit everywhere." She go, "Aidan, no problem. On with the runners." And then she goes. And 20 minutes or 25 minutes later, Patricia put her clothes back on. And that's that 20 minutes over. Now, she may have went, just to add in this, she may have went, the aliens are coming, she may have said, "I'll save you because I'm Jesus." That's the other thing that you will get, where a person will input, "I feel like such fucking nobody that I'm going to tell myself I'm Jesus." Big deal. So 20 minutes later, half an hour later, Patricia goes back to her house, wakes up the next morning. And she wakes up upon a continuum. We're down one at the end of the continuum. She goes, "Jesus, Eimear." I mean, just to say, just a little note on profanity here. People who lose contact with reality curse all the time. There's no point in me. Okay, so if some people don't like it, that's why I do. So she goes, "Jesus, Eimear, you're not gonna fucking believe what I did yesterday." And and the tears will be there like this. Shit.
I lost you there. Can you repeat that? Can you just repeat what you were quoting her? Just bring it closer to the phone.
Sorry, she'll be there going, "Eimear," she comes out upon a continuum, and down one end of the continuum is, "Eimear, you know, I really believed this stuff yesterday." And she's really shook. But the delusions are gone. They're gone. What's also gone is the personality difficulties that a person often has are also gone. This is really, in traditional psychiatry, when psychiatry listened, the joke was, how do you heal? Well, not joke, how do you heal a person with a personality disorder? You get them to have a psychotic episode because the personality issues are resolved. Now, you want to don't try this at home.
Yeah.
So that's one end of the continuum. And then down the other end of the continuum, Patricia is there with you and goes, "Gee, Eimear, I know something really serious happened yesterday, but yet what you notice is that she's profoundly delusional. And that's the continuum, right? But wherever the person is on the continuum, they will share that the personality issues are gone. Some people on the continuum will be out of their body, energetic. This is traditional as well. What's a psychotic person? A person who lives up here. They're out of their body energetically. And if you give medications at this stage, one of the things they do is they keep the person out of their blooming body. That's one of the things that happens. That's why I'm done medication. And what happens with Patricia over the next 6 to 12 weeks is that she, we're now down the end where our Patricia's come out profoundly delusional. Okay, that's the end we're down. So over the next 6 to 12 weeks, she'll begin, very, very delusional, but doesn't talk very much. And you'll notice she begins to come into her body. And within 6, 8, 12 weeks, she's back into her body. And that's that phase over with. Okay? And then what happens is a person tends to do one of three things. And there's others. Number one, Patricia gets up and she starts walking. And she walks and walks and walks and walks and walks. And what she's doing is she's walking out the psychosis. She's walking it out. She's discharging this trauma through walking. And at the same time, within herself, she's going over stuff. And she walks it out. Some people will cycle it out. I came across one guy, I remember years ago, I was just thinking out here actually, and he was a jogger. And when he first came out where Patricia is, he started jogging, but he couldn't jog. He was like Pinocchio, right? 3 years later, you should have. He was like just this absolute fabulously positive posture, positively healthy guy jogging around the place. The picture of health and well-being, unbelievable. Okay. The other thing that Patricia will do is she will start talking, and she will talk delusions, and she'll get up in the morning and she'll talk from the morning until the night, and it's all delusional. It's all delusional. And that will then go on and on and on. And then within 2 years, it will end. And how it will end is as follows. For Patricia, sometimes you'll notice the person it just fades. And how you first begin to notice it is that she starts talking about something else that and you go, goodness me, I haven't heard that delusional stuff in a while. And then you realize, oh fuck, she's not coming out of it. And she's on the upslope. Now, when you're on the upslope, there's kind of like this. You go up and it's a bit down a little bit. And what that is that on a Tuesday and Thursday, Patricia's delusional. On Wednesday, for 20 minutes to 4 hours, she's a bit more delusional. And that's it. And then she's grand Thursday again, Very odd occasion, you get a spiral where the person comes down and they are noticeably for a very short time in what could be called a very mini episode. But it's not episodic. It's a mistake to presume that. So when it will end in the following way, then, where it just stops talking about it, and she rejoins ordinary everyday life and blah blah blah. The other way is Patricia goes to bed on a Friday night, gets up on the Saturday, never talks about it again. That's it. Never talks about it. The third way is that the person transitions, and most unusual, the person transitions from the expression of emotion through delusion to a genuine trauma model. And they start talking about their sense of who they are and wait till I tell you what happened to me. And that's the way. And when it ends, and this is the end of that, the person will come out upon another continuum, right? Patricia comes out down one end, we're back working, back in relationships, and that's it. Doesn't want to talk about it. And you don't, I'd never ask somebody about, hey, Patricia, you've just been out of your tree here with this stuff. Tell me about it. Because that's an invasion of privacy. That's a violation. The person's already been violated. When you inquire, you're violating. That's it. And I know a person who's been through this, and if somebody asks her about it, she says, she goes, well, Mars bars made me crazy and line bars cured me. Okay? And it's a subtle hint of off, mind your bloody business. Okay? Yeah. Very important to respect people. So she comes out upon this continuum, and down that end, back to work, everything is fine. If the person has children, if she's a child, all the relationships are all grand, they're fine. But down the other end of the continuum, Patricia comes out where back working, etc., and so forth. But there's a number of different topics which you can't talk to Patricia about, right? And we all know people like this, and I sort of come across, whatever, John, don't mention whatever to John because then you're going. And she's a bit like that, and that's where the person. Now, if you're a friend of Patricia's, that's fine because you meet her once every fortnight. There's no problem. You just ignore it. But if you're Patricia's mother, father, husband's wife, you're living with the person, and your life is truncated because you can't talk about something. So what happens is that she's down this end of the continuum, and then over the next while, she begins to move up. And you notice we can talk about those things, and that occurs over. Okay. And that is the end of an episode of schizophrenia. Patricia may have a second episode. She may have a third. It's very unlikely to have a second, and really unlikely to have a third. And she'll have a third. Psychiatrists, people want to think, a person's going to have a second episode because of something to do with, somebody dies or something. Possibly. But what gets people and pushes people into another episode is when they're treated as like shit by people who should love them. It's the single thing. And I've seen it happen, I've seen it at times, and I remember, Jesus, we should have went in. Like, fucking ours is there. But unfortunately, this is what can happen. And if Patricia goes down the second episode, it's characterized by the delusions are as deep, but they're less pervasive. By that I mean this, and it's really funny. You'll be out. Remember, I was walking in the park with John, right? And John is going on, and he's delusional, this, that, the other, and he meets a friend. And he immediately comes out of this and talks to his friend for 15 or 20 minutes about the friend's new career path. And it's a very interesting, very grounded, very ordinary conversation, right? No problem. The friend goes, and he goes back into it again. And Misha here is the object. Oh, geez, then you're trying to fucking murder me out, bastard, you're fucking murder. But that's the difference then. And the person comes through that usually 3 or 4 months. And when Patricia comes out, she comes out on this continuum again about what she can and can't talk about, but it's much further up towards I'm back living and talk about Benang. And that's the second.
Wow.
Sinead.
Simon has a question for you. A friend I went to school with became a psychiatric nurse, and he swears by the use of electrotherapy use on the brain of patients. What do you think of this type of therapy? The movie scene in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest comes to mind.
I think on two things as a human being, I think, what is wrong with us that we would electrocute another human being? What is wrong with us? Okay. The idea that electrocuting somebody would help somebody. Yeah. What happens psychologically for somebody? There's a number of different things going on. When you listen to people who've had electric shock treatment, what's going on within them is that an aspect of them knows that if I don't improve here, these fuckers are going to keep electrocuting me and they're maybe going to kill me. That's what's going on unconsciously and just subconsciously for the person. I've got to demonstrate that I'm okay because these guys are electrocuting me, for Christ's sake. What's going on at a deeper level, you have to be very careful here. At a deeper level is that a majority of people who suffer severe mental health difficulties are profoundly wounded. They've entered into an area of what's called transmarginal stress. And you'll all have different words on this. Transmarginal stress is when you move into an area where everything becomes confused. I no longer want to live. I no longer want to die. Pain is good. Pain is bad. I'm shit. I'm okay. So you're into this area where the person is turned on themselves and has beliefs about, I'm a piece of shit anyway, sure. No wonder you're trying to murder me. So the efficacy, I mean, I don't even know how we can even comment on the idea that electrocuting a person. We don't we have problems electrocuting an animal in an abattoir. And it's unreal, Yeah. And that's where there's no efficacy for it at all. Recently, just to say that there's bit of an upsurge in related to this psychosurgery. Psychosurgery is where people operate on the brain with a view to I don't know what the hell. Our knowledge of the brain is almost zero. Our knowledge of the mind's interaction with the brain is almost zero. But yet you think you can operate on this and help someone. And I listened to an interview with psychosurgeons, a number from overseas the other day, and it was like they were salivating at the idea of doing this stuff where the obvious outcome is brain damage. The outcome of electroshock is brain damage. The outcome of psychosurgery is brain damage.
Are you saying, are you talking about frontal lobe lobotomies, or have they?
No.
They've streamlined it. It's even more sophisticated. I didn't know they were doing psychosurgery.
Yeah, it's kind of coming. You see, it's not sophisticated because they don't know what they're doing. So they're implanting electrodes with this idea that we can stimulate this, that, and the other. What do you stimulate? What are you doing? You're going to. It's absolute rubbish. And these members of psychiatric profession, also surgeons, not only should be struck off, but should be prosecuted for assault, because you're doing if you are a surgeon, you cannot operate on somebody when there is no evidence or you don't have the skills. It's like skills to do it. It's like me and you get up tomorrow morning and go, you know something, Eimear, I'm a neurosurgeon and I'm decided that day and I'm going to operate tomorrow. That is what it's like.
Devar of Mani says, when I first told my psychiatrist I was 12 that I spoke to nature, she proceeded to try to get my parents to have me committed and probably filled to the brim with narcotics. I take it, given that you're saying probably filled, that didn't happen. Wow. I think you should have all of the orders should be in then, if that's the case.
Bless.
Yeah, and Poppy says Poppy's either in England or Crete. She moves around. It's important to take control of our own thoughts and beliefs. We are raised to believe everything we hear, especially if it's told to us in the name of science, religion, or others. We all need to learn to take control of our own minds, to realize we can take our power back and our life back from the control of others.
Exactly. It's self-directed healthcare. That's what it is. When a person loses contact with reality, and turns to schizophrenia, yes, then we need to accompany the person. But you do what's called FTP. You follow the person, which is the parallel to the person deciding for themselves. Because what you're doing is right. And the person will tell you, it doesn't matter how out of it the person is, they will tell you what to do. And what they tell you to do is shut up, get out of the way, and listen to them. And just be with me. That's it. That's what I want. And it's very, very interesting that on very rare occasions, I remember not too long ago, where a person absolutely in the horrors of loss of contact reality, and she came out and she said, just to say, all the people who I'm talking about here, just to be clear, none of it is confidential, just to say. And she said, you know, I know that this may not be real and this may not be true. You just believe me. For the love, and that's another love of God, just fucking believe. That's what I want from you. Because down in there, I'm dying. This is what's going on. I'm dying. Don't want you to do anything else. Just believe. And the response of choice to a person who's lost contact reality is, okay, Jesus, Aidan, there is 50 aliens living in my shower. Okay.
It's interesting because she says there's, I know there's a part of this that this may not be true, but I still want you to believe me. So there's a part of them that knows it isn't, and there's another part that does. And I know Tom Anderson, I don't know if you came across him, as a social psychiatrist from Norway.
Oh, yeah.
Brilliant guy, open dialogue with Jaakko Sakula, but also Shaban, the healer friend. And they both talking about it. I remember it was talking to the part of them that isn't mad, because there is a part. It's listening to them. It's not just looking to them as a mad person, or just to put it crudely, but talking, hearing them and recognizing the part.
You see, I don't consider the person fucking mad at all.
No, but it's the part
in a sense
here.
I think that's very important to say. I'm neither considering the person as being mad or not mad. They're just going through an experience which is recovery. They're recovering from stuff. But for me, there's not this big. I'm not trying to reach in. Well, it's not quite true. I'm not trying to reach in and find this part of it. It's not. It's if I listen and accompany this person appropriately, the system is infinitely wiser than me or her or him. You know, and it will come through it. And the reason the Norway's model, Finland's model, which you're referring to there, works, and it has a huge success rate. Stuff like this has a success rate of greater than 90%. when you do certain stuff.
Yeah.
What they do, and Finland, I'll be more familiar with what you're referring to, is the person gets into difficulty and they all get around in a circle.
That's right. And
they just have a chat. The core thing they don't do is they don't deepen the person's process. Never deepen the person's process. There's 4 things you do and 2 you don't. Never deepen the person's process. And they sit there and they do practical things. You know, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? And they create the other two important: time and space, not deepening the process, social support and respect, and waiting. And they come from a culture where, you're talking about almost up in some of the Arctic Circle, where everything was practical. Because if it wasn't practical, you're going to die. There's no time to do group therapy, guys. You just practice. You don't want to do it. So it's all practical. And they have a cultural belief which gives birth to a dialogue and way of working, which gives time, space, follows the person, avoids inappropriate intervention. It doesn't deepen the process. And number 6, don't become the object of the person's delusion.
Sorry about that. Go on. Apologies.
And that's why, and they have a really, really good success rate. Yeah, absolutely. And absolutely. What we're talking about, self-directed healthcare has a success rate of over 90%. Following people in the way they've described just now in schizophrenia has a success rate of over 90%. And what happens, it's very interesting for people who are in the other 10%, right? And this is really interesting. I'm going to get in trouble here. Is you're with the person and they're going through this. An example, you have a young person, right? You're with a young person, and you know that this young person is going into the criminal justice system, okay? And you're sitting there with him, going, "Listen, what are you at? I mean, there's 2 roads here. One, if you do this, you're going to prison. If you do this, you'll be fine, most likely." And you're sitting there and you realize that there's the higher aspect of this person is going, I'm going down this road. And you find this with people sometimes who lose contact with realities. The higher aspect, higher aspect of them, or the super conscious as it becomes distilled down, is going, I'm going to have this experience. And it is really reckless. It's unbelievable. And being around it. And what you do with the young people, what you do with this person, is you try to minimize the harm for them and the people around them. But the higher self is all about, I'm going to have that experience. And that's how you work with the 10%. You go, and I go to the higher self. Okay, you know, what do you do? I mean, this is a person not suffered enough. Is there not enough pain going on? And you communicate in this way, and you say, you know, and that's how you work with
that. Wow. Yeah. Somebody has a question. What's the difference between talking to an alien or talking to God?
It's up to you.
There was one response to Vara that God doesn't answer.
It's really interesting when that woman was saying earlier on about talking to nature and stuff, that it reminded me of when, say, for example, we go back to Patricia, right? And Patricia, what tends to happen is when Patricia goes naked down in the town here, she gets arrested. And she ends up in the local psychiatric hospital or morgue, which are not hospitals, they're jails. They're jails because you can't come and go what you like please, and you're forced to be medicated, right? There it's called a jail. And she ends up there and she picks up the phone 2 days later and she goes to me, Jesus, they're all fucking mad in here. They're all crazy. And it doesn't matter what I say, they won't let me go and they won't believe that I'm saying. Now, Patricia is out of it. But this is what's known as the double bind. It's really important for schizoid people who suffer with schizoid stuff, not schizophrenia, schizoid, where this Patricia is now in a situation where it doesn't matter how she behaves. If I pretend that I'm crazy, I'm banjaxed. If I pretend I'm sane, I'm banjaxed. And it really rips the person apart. But what happens very quickly, she goes, how am I going to get out of here? You know? And what Patricia doesn't realize is that in Ireland, in this country, I know that the psychiatrists want you out as quick as possible because they want to go, look, my mates have got you out. So you then enter the patient role and you start talking about the patient role with them. And you say, well, you know, you tell the doctors, usually male, you tell him everything that you just tell him exactly what he wants to hear without patronizing, because he may be whatever, biopsychiatrist, but he ain't stupid. And she says, like this young one, he's asking me if I hear voices. I mean, what do I say? I've been listening to God since I was 3 years of age, for Christ's sakes. What am I going to fucking say? You know? And you say, well, and then it goes on. She's joking now this day. And you get people who are really psychotic. They'll enter into the patient role and they start taking the piss out of the psychiatrist, and they will. And you have to say to them, you know, and I have said, you know, you've 7 to 9 days to do here, okay? And then you're out. 7 to 9 days. So let's, you know, my if I was you, I'd be the real compliant good patient. I wouldn't be taking the piss out of them but it's up to you. But 7 to 9 days you'll be out. And then, then the person comes out. It's very interesting. When Patricia leaves the psychiatric hospital, the nurse brings her out. And invariably the nurse would say, Patricia, it's been lovely meeting you. Don't ever come back. Don't ever come back. And they'll say it numerous times. Because they all know if you come back, this is a pathway to chronicity. You're fucked. You're gone. And they would say that, you know, don't ever come back.
And would she have been medicated in those 9 days?
Oh, yes. Yeah. And then, of course, you know, in certain cases, you know, the person doesn't want to take the medication, and the shorter time the person's been in there, the easier it is to come off.
Yeah.
So you're okay. But if the person has been on a long time, then the person wants to come off. So you want to come off, that's fair enough. So this is how you do it. You know, we get, you know, you put in place a program, you do research online, and then you know, if it's medium or long, you say it's going to take X, and then you multiply by 3. It's going to take 3X. That's what you do, right? But if a person just comes out from a hospital, most of them just throw it away, and you're okay because you haven't been there. Now this is in the public system. In the private system, well, you see, lads, you know, we get 6 weeks out of you a year from the insurance company. So isn't it amazing how treatment lasts 6 weeks, unless there's somebody else to take your place? And the carpets are a bit plusher, but they're still prisons, and that's what it is. But it's very interesting about coming off medication. You come across this quite often. Say a middle-aged fella in his 40s that had this manic stuff, and he goes to the psychiatrist and then comes out and he does a bit of research. And he's been on the stuff a while.
Come a bit closer to your phone. I'm losing
you. He's in his 40s and he's gone off, managed to get the medication, right? And he comes back into the psychiatrist and he goes, listen, I've been reading up on this stuff and I'm not sure about all this stuff, right? And the psychiatrist goes, well, you have a biochemical imbalance and you need
this stuff. Yeah.
And your man goes, well, I'm going to come off, right? And your man, this John, comes off it, goes home, comes off it, and gets all these rebound effects. Goes back to the psychiatrist and says, I feel shit. And the psychiatrist goes, look, I told you needed it. So the psychiatrist willfully and purposely set this man up by not explaining that this stuff is going to result in physiological effects and you must have it.
Withdrawal.
It's unreal. And this sort of stuff's quite common. You get stuff like that quite common.
I have a question. Sandy is I'm really interested to find out what causes the schizophrenia you're describing. As someone close to me gets the symptoms in psychotic episodes, and apart from reassuring and listening, I have no idea what else I can do. They have refused meds for the reasons you spoke about earlier.
Yeah, so the person is having episodes of psychosis. So what you do is you just accompany the person, respect the person, follow the person. 5 things you do. There's 6 things you do. Person needs time. Person needs space. You don't do inappropriate intervention. So inappropriate intervention, you're there. We don't want to make the situation any worse. Medication is going to make it worse. It's as simple as that. I'm sorry, but that's the way. And you follow the person. You listen to the person. And just listen to them. Follow them. Follow their system. What they want to do. What this person is doing is they're doing episodic for some reason. And you might sit with yourself. You're all involved in druidry and shamanism and channeling stuff. There's loads of help. You sit there and go, I have my friend. I wonder what I do. We sit around here listening to energies. Fuck lads, what do you? We're in trouble here. What do you think? Oh well, why don't you try this? Or we years ago. Sorry, the other 2 for this person. The 2 things. You do not become the object of the person's delusion. Your friend's delusion. So how you do that is that person, like, for example, if a person says to me, Aidan, I think you're one of the aliens. No, I'm not one of the aliens. I guarantee you I'm not one of the aliens. And if you think this at all, just run it by me again. I'm not one of the aliens. So, and you don't deepen the person's process. This is a mistake that people make all the time. They think this person is going through schizophrenia stuff. Now, if I can get him to have insight by going, why, what, when, where, oh my goodness me, he'll have this insight and he'll live happily ever after. It's the exact opposite. When you deepen a person's process, what this person has, when he's having these experiences, I'm not saying definitely for this person, but in general, has this huge big thing of trauma. What he's doing is making stuff up to discharge it slightly. His system is doing that. You trying to get him to have insight into this is just going to make the system go haywire. So that's what happens.
So you convince them you're not an alien.
Yeah. So what happens? Just to go back to this gentleman. This is an Irish guy, a couple in Germany. It's very tragic. And this gentleman, they had a child, and the child was 2 weeks old, and he went into a psychotic episode. Now, the biggest, over 50% of the main stuff that's in people's trauma is birth trauma. Okay, so therefore, it's interesting to happen around birth of his child. So what he did was, my understanding is that he began to think that the aliens were coming in through the picture to kill his child. And he got out a whole load of knives and he put him on the bed. And of course, his wife got really concerned, partner got really concerned, because I'm here, newborn by my partner's, and unfortunately she could, well, She called the police, and unfortunately, he was shot. So what needed to happen there was we would have walked in and say, his name is Stephen. We sat down with Stephen and said, listen, Stephen, you know, I'm going to sit with you now, and I'm going to do my best. Just hear him a bit now. I'm going to do my best to protect you and your family and your child from these aliens. And I'm going to do my best to do that for you now. And I really hope this is okay. And he would have said, she's okay, that's okay. And I know if I said to him, Stephen, the aliens aren't coming, he would have immediately turned around. That he said, first of all, and that would be the alliance already happened, because he's creating this to heal himself, and I'm getting it the fucking way. So within an hour of saying, listen, I'm here, I'm going to do my best. I'm going to sit here with you as long as it takes now. Within an hour, he's going to turn around. He's going to say, Aidan, I think you're one of the aliens, right? And I have to respond to him then. No, I'm not one of the aliens, Steve. I am not. Because if I don't respond to that, he's got knives over here, and my life is then at risk, and that's real. So you avoid being that's a really classic bottom-out example of that. And what would have happened with this gentleman then is that within 48 hours, he would have come out of that then, right? And what would have happened then is, and how you know this is true is because you can feel it. You feel it is what we're talking about, this man. It's a reality of this. Yeah, you feel it. So after 48 hours, he would have come out of it. And we know that most likely he would remain out of this for 2 weeks, because he's able to park it for that, to get in place the care for himself and his children. And what we do in that 2 weeks is train the family there, train them up. You say, listen, maybe it's not going to happen yet, but if it is, listen, let's just put in a few things. And most likely within 2 weeks, he would have then recommenced the psychotic process, similar to Patricia.
Okay. Wow, thank you. Silver Branch says, I'm listening in Arizona and realized it's a fine line between uncontrolled psychotic break and extraordinary spiritual experience, which can be controlled. Have you anything to say to that?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, I mean, when you're experiencing something like this, just talking about you as an individual person, what you do is you sit down and you go, okay, you're back to self-directed healthcare. What feels best for me? From what I'm saying here, I am a little bit concerned that it is difficult for me as a person, and that there is something, and that needs to be respected. So you put in place for you what you feel will keep you safe from going over this line for you. In general, a psychospiritual emergency is different than a psychotic episode, because a psychospiritual episode is where stuff just gets a bit much for you, and you have stuff which is a bit different, but you're able to stand up and say, okay, I'm able to have a cup of tea now.
Yeah.
If the process is different, you are working through and affected by trauma, but you're not a person who has this huge ball that has to be discharged through the creation of something out here. That's it. But you as an individual person, what we do and what's best for us is to come back, sit with yourself, but what feels right. You know, you're most likely a very experienced person. You know what's right for yourself. Just take that time and find the supports that you need, if that's whatever it is. What do I need now? I just want to say a little bit about stuff that a psychospiritual emergency is profoundly different than a psychotic episode. But I just want to say something to about another way of seeing a psychotic episode is it's a psychospiritual emergency that doesn't finish at 6 o'clock on a Sunday. And those of you who are practitioners will know exactly what I'm referring to there. What I'm referring to is that within the profession, even those who practice like myself, there's this idea that there's still a group of people out there who we label as they're the really mad, they're the really crazy, but we're over here, we have psychospiritual emergencies, but we're not like them. I'm just to say to this lady who asked that question, I'm not saying this in reference to you. What I'm speaking, everything that I'm saying is already being rehearsed many, many times. Okay, this was going to be said. It's not in relation to you, just to be thinking. But, and this is kind of what Groff does a bit. And I heard it the other day again from somebody who went through their experience. This idea that there isn't people who are genuinely mentally ill, and it's just not. It's not true. Okay, and what happens in a country like Ireland, as you probably know, Eimear, is that people who are labelled this, they serve certain functions for society, but they can't be allowed to serve functions for us. You know, that I have psychospiritual emergencies, but that lot over there have this, even though it is profoundly different. It is profoundly different. But the way that it's all worked with is the same. We be present with ourselves. We listen. We live through the process of recovery of psychospiritual emergency is the process of living through. The process for a person over here is the process of being accompanied by people who allow the person to live through. It's all very similar, you know.
Yeah. Zell says, really resonated with what you said about how people are treated after an episode diagnosis. We've made mental health such an in the head and therefore internal to the individual thing. When there's so much evidence about the role of community in society, the effects of inequality and health being a good example. Yeah. We need more discussion about our collective response to mental distress of all kinds and what we can do together to heal together.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. So we need a world in which people love themselves and are loved by each other. That's what we need.
Yeah. And Tracy Rupp says this is interesting that she's on a reservation in SD. I'm not sure where SD is, anybody in the US. They told me about a boy who was diagnosed with schizophrenia by the mainstream, but it turned out he had ghost sickness from grave robbing. Traditional healing helped him. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So what happens is that he was interfered with energetically.
Yeah.
Isn't that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she says, absolutely. They have rewritten the DSM for their tribe and they don't recognize schizophrenia as an actual disorder. And that's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, schizophrenia is the process of recovery. Yeah. It's a process of allowing the sense of self to discharge certain stuff to function or it is recovery. It's not something you don't recover from schizophrenia. It is what's recovering.
Yeah, so that's a lovely reframe. Linda Jones says, love this conversation. It's so interesting, needs to be talked about. And Stuart Watson says, we know more about our solar system than our mind and brain. And Philippa, it's interesting. I've known mediums being medicated because they were considered delusional. I remember doing, when I lived in Lesotho, I was doing I met a healer from South Africa and she was doing some training with us. And she was telling us about her own story, where she had this awakening, this energetic awakening. And she said, fortunately, she was not diagnosed with schizophrenia, but the term she used was medium mystic madness. So somebody recognized it, that everything was, she was seeing everything, all her filters were gone. And I was a vegetarian at the time. And the treatment was no meditation, no journeying, and eat red meat, which I thought was the most horrific of things to do because it was to ground her. Which is what she did to ground her, and it worked. So,
so we're giving the person's. That's very similar to when a person meditates, whatever, has the experience of the sense of self dissolving.
Yeah,
and that's it. The system just dissolves and changes, and so it's very challenging if you know what's going on, and it is difficult with this stuff. And what you're doing then is you're saying, we'll give you the red meat, but what you're also doing is you're giving time and space for the system to regulate itself. It's called convalescing. And it's very interesting that I was listening to a GP a while ago, and he was saying that the idea of convalescing is gone. It's just gone.
Oh, really?
That people, they want to be better tomorrow when they, and this sort of stuff. But it's very interesting that clinical depression, what happens is, as everybody knows, it's kind of continuum, and you go past the kind of veil into clinical depression, and clinical depression is characterized by, I want to close and draw from the word, close the curtains. That's clinical depression, and what that is it's an invitation to convalesce. Is one of the things that it is, and it's very interesting that there's a group of young people, usually between about 17 and 22, mostly women, who experience this, right? And they fall into three further groups. One is where the young woman just says to her family, I'm withdrawn from the world, lads, and family goes, it's fine, support you. Within a year, she's okay. 90% of people are okay, and within 2 years, it's grand. More than 90. You have a second group that's in the middle, and she says to the family, I'm withdrawn, I need to do this. And the family said, we're very worried about you. We think you should go to a psychiatrist. And she reaches deep down and she goes, if you fucking do that to me, I will never speak to you. And she's serious because she knows that if I don't do this, I'm finished. And the outcome for people in that group, 90% within the year are okay, 2 years fine. And then there's the third group. Families say, we're very concerned to go through a psychiatrist. And you come back 15, 20, 25 years later, and they're banned. So, and this is one thing, the literature from before the use of antidepressants, that's what the course of clinical depression is. That's beyond, past the veil of depression, was year to 2 years, 90% or more grand if you leave the person alone.
I remember being at a workshop years and years and years ago and doing a sharing. And one of the women there she had hit a depressive episode in her life, and she took to her bed, I think, between 3 and 6 months, and her family allowed her. And she's that was just what I needed to do, is just go in. But it takes a lot of courage for a family to see someone, because you're wondering, you're
bombarded by all this stuff about, it's a biochemical imbalance, they need this stuff, and you're a horrible family because you're not.
You're not helping them. Yeah.
You're not helping. Oh, aren't you terrible? And
John, I had PTSD caused by trauma in 1970. It was only when I got involved in meditation in 1986. That's a long time, 16 years, that I was able to deal with the situation and heal. Wow.
Well done.
Actually, Devara of Mani says, fun fact, well, he says it. Egas Moniz, if that's his name, the man who invented the lobotomy actually received a Nobel Prize for the discovery.
God.
That's really interesting.
And it's very interesting that you can find obviously, you can find written accounts of people who say that frontal lobotomy is the best thing that ever happened to them. And would we ever recommend that profound destruction of the human brain? We certainly would not, but you can find people who will say that it was the best.
I remember seeing that film about Francis Farmer. Is it Francis Farmer?
I don't.
Oh, I remember. Just really, really sad. Just, becoming just a woman acting out, misbehaving and being wild. Had it.
Yeah.
And I know when they found it with the guy, the guy on the building site, that's when the crowbar went into his brain. That's how they. I remember learning about psychology as an undergrad. He was very, very bright, and something went through his brain, and he survived, and he was very mild, and that started that thing. But that film, I can't remember what was his name. And the actress is gone for me. It was brilliant, but she was wild. The character was wild, had the lobotomy, and then just went like a Stepford wife.
That's what medication does to people. It shuts the person down.
Yeah.
Can't function, can't cognitive. All measures of cognitive function plummet. The person's sedated.
That's right.
Horrible, absolutely pure poison.
Absolutely. Devara Mani, in Sweden we have meds, but our psychologists also seek out other options. Medication isn't usually the first step. It used to be when I was a young lad, and we also don't go hardcore on drugs. That's A question is, how do you deal with a person who's determined to fly? I assume she means someone who's wanting to leave.
I remember, a person, when a person is in a state like that, the way you stop the person flying is you sit with them and you stay with them until they come true, not want to fly anymore. Because I would work often in situations which you should really have a big team, right? So on occasions, you leave people and people are vulnerable, and they're vulnerable too. They're up on the 6th floor, and they have that. I can fly. I'm trying to remember about it. And what I would do is just stay with the person. Just stay with them. There's something else come to me in a minute. It's interesting just to say about suicide. That's when you are a person suicidal, what it means in general is that you've had an experience past point bearing. Okay, so what's happened is a person has had an experience where he or she has went from I wanting to live to wanting to die. And what happens then is that experience plus the way to cope with it, which is I want to die, is suppressed and comes into unconscious, comes conscious later. And what becomes conscious later is not the experience, but the way to cope with it, which is that I want to die. And that's the core issue involved for most people in suicidal ideation. And that's what can be happening with this person. And what's very important with somebody is I will be sitting there going, is this a suicidal going on here? That the person is actually coming out, I actually want to be dead. Now, it can be, I want to be part of the bigger picture. I want to be part of the divine, so I'm just going to follow the person. But if I have a sense of suicidal, I know that I'm going to have to get in there and fight for that person because nobody's ever fought for him before. And that is so important for people with family suicidal, is that you have to get in. This is where you're more directed. You get in. You could say, well, I will get in there. And I will say to you, I'm not going to let go of you. And I have literally done that. You just put a rope, tackle people, held them, coming up the bridges, clamp them. What the hell are you clamping for? Do you think I'm walking over this bridge with you without clamping you? But I'm going to get in there. You're not dying on my watch. And that's fucking. I won't say this to the person. In the back of it, I absolutely respect a person's life, person's right to end their life. I have no right to tell them, live your. I have no right to do that in my view. The amount of suffering and pain that this person may have been through or face in the future, if the person wishes to take their life, absolutely respect that. But you're not going to do it on my watch. I would stay there, and I'd stay there, and I'm talking, post-release from hospital, I've done 72-hour sessions with people to get them through that hospital.
You mean you've been with them for 72 hours?
Yeah.
Non-stop?
Almost, yeah. Get a little bit of sleep.
My God. That's... Wow.
Yeah,
that's
what... you grab bits of whatever. But what that does is in relation to it, gets that person past to that stage post-hospitalization where they've been treated like shit. And then that's that out of the way, and then we get on with go. But it's very interesting about the person's life. So that's what would be going on for me. And I would also be, and I'd sit myself, what's my sense of it? Go with it. What's my sense of it? And it's very important to, if you don't know what's happening, to put out that intention. I need more information. I need to know what's happening. I need to know how to be present. What does this person need? How do I need to be here? And I've been doing that regularly. I haven't said that because it just happens so naturally, just to listen, just to go with it. But that's what I'll be doing. And if stuff comes out, I want to be out there. I want to fly. I want to be okay. So learn how to do it properly. Learn how to fly. Learn how to do that. And and when you start saying that to somebody, why don't you learn how to do this do this properly? They'll stop you and they'll start going, oh no, I want to fly. So it's a trauma based.
Yeah. 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 And they're talking about drink. Okay, speaking of, has anyone seen? Okay, that's all right. Okay. So now you're also a bard.
No.
Well.
Yes, I am a bard. Yes, that's me.
Yeah. No denying.
I'm not denying.
Yes.
Should we do a bit of bardic stuff?
Yeah, and we can come back into to just before we do this, okay, is delusion considered a mental illness? Surely there are degrees of delusion that don't require medical assistance.
Well, people, biopsychiatry consider delusions a medical issue. They're not a medical issue at all. They consider that. So it doesn't matter how severe they are to me. They're not a medical issue.
Yeah, and Linda says the process you're describing as intervention to sit with the person would be very difficult for a lot of family members to deal with if the person has knives or other forms of weapons.
Yeah, absolutely. So what you need is absolutely, and and what you need is weight of numbers. So important to have weight of numbers. When a person loses contact reality, one of the things which is great for the person is to be with people who are safe, because then they begin to vibrate at that energy as well. And it holds them. And the process of accompanying somebody is a process of holding the person. And the more people you have, the more easy you're able to hold the person. And it becomes an issue of weight of numbers. And it's so much more easier, if a person is in that sort of state, if the more people they are, the better. It's weight of numbers.
Okay. Except we don't, it's Maura Barrett says, do you think our society is afraid of feelings? My mother could never handle my tears. Is there a role to play in having a good snot and ball? I imagine there is. Should society provide more space for this?
It'd be wonderful. It would be wonderful if people just could be emotionally, whatever way you are, just of course. Nothing beats a good cry, as some people say.
Oh, absolutely. Sandy, who asked you about the friend who's psychotic, she says, thank you. I've become the object of the psychotic episode, and thankfully I called upon my guides, which intervened, and I was no longer in danger. This is really interesting and extremely helpful. Thank you so much.
Well done. Yep.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, because we're involved in Druidry, we might just take a bit of time just to thank those people who have shared their story with us tonight, as well as our ancestors.
Yes.
And we might thank the energies which have set aside time to communicate to us a deep and profound and authentic understanding of the loss of contact with reality. And to say Gurma good lair, Asukta Vetling, Gomaka Galair, Asukta Vetling, Yog, or and just to hold in our hearts, just for a moment, our brothers and sisters who have turned to modern medicine in great, terrible pain.
Yeah.
And I've been told that you're less valuable than money to us. Agus tasuda gomats tasuda green go nine shoychip art yovalda. Art yovalcha a bit oid shoptra Agus oid in Vina. Some down shop Agus some cade down Ellen.
You'll need to translate for our listeners.
We hope that you will find a safe place which is both within yourself and outside of yourself, and that you will find a place in this world and in the next.
Great. Hey, thank you. Pat says it was Phineas Gage. That's the name, the guy who got the brain injury that changed him.
Yes.
And go on.
It was an explosion, I believe, and the iron bar went through the front.
Yeah, it was the iron bar. That was the one that went through. It was caused by an explosion. Yeah. Liz Hill says mental illness is a symptom of social illness, and it's important to look deeper.
I think it's very interesting that the focus and focus is one of the things about psychotherapy, is that the focus is very often on the individual, when in fact an individual is born and reared in a social context. It's very, and if the social context changes, then it has very profound effects on the person. But the one social context we don't talk about in our society of what does it mean to be a parent? How do I be a parent? And it is the relationship with our parents which is the prime contributor towards our mental health. It's as simple as that, and that is not to ignore social inequalities at all or anything.
Are you talking about the schizophrenic mother that Lang used to posit?
You know, it's there. Most people who end up with mental health difficulties grow up in a family background where mom and dad didn't know how to be mom and dad, didn't know how to be parents, just like their parents didn't know how to be parents. There is within our society 10 to 15% of parents who are willfully cruel and vindictive towards their children, no doubt about it. But we need to have the courage to, face that, what our role is as parents. And I work, up and down the generations. And, if I'm working, talking about a child, I would say to the parents and fathers who have done is that today, it's about this child. It's about your child. And today, it's about you being the parent. It's about you being the adult. Tomorrow, we'll talk about how you were raised every day of your life as a child. But today, you're the parent of this child. And you have that boundary. And that is how grave the injustice and harm to father can have been. But today, you're this child's parent. Mm-hmm. And the people who have the most power to bring about healing in a person is the person's parents, irrespective of their age. And we need to stop shying away from discussing what it means to be a parent.
Yeah.
And I mentioned CAMS earlier on before we were talking, is that last year, I remember CAMS' child and adolescent
we're losing again. Can you come closer again?
He was talking about CAMS, child and adult mental health, and he was his child he was 7 or 8, and he was saying that he went in there and he felt blamed, and I didn't say anything about it, but I was standing there going, you're sitting with somebody now who's able to give you the skills in 15 minutes to rehabilitate your child and to heal your child, and your focus is on they said I'm to blame. And it's very important to distinguish between blame and responsibility. Yes, you are to blame, which is an emotional thing, but you may not be responsible because you didn't know any better. And when you train parents to train them up to 15 minutes how to rebuild their kids, what the child wants is a child wants to express how she or he is feeling in the context of being accepted by the most important people in his or her life, the parents. That's what the child wants. And when the child gets that, the child is not interested in holding you responsible. It just gets to blame you. Fucking 10 minutes later, it's over. They're not interested in holding you responsible, even. They just, that's it, done. It's like the child has more understanding. And you've seen this either, where the child has more understanding than the parent that, of course, you were shy as a parent. Look at you. Look at your life. You're in bits. And the young child who's 3, 4, 5, or 12 understands that better than the parent. So we need to make a distinction between responsibility and blame. And for me, we need to have a conversation about parents. We're as we know, I mean, my life, our life here is huge amounts of I was going to get on that. We need to have that conversation about what does it mean? What's the role of a parent? Alison Hunter would say that the role of a parent is to consciously conceive your children in the context consciously of them being wanted and accepted, being held in utero through birth, through early life, in love, acceptance, and released into birthed into adulthood. That's a really big ask, and there isn't a single one of us. I mean, I certainly wasn't raised that way, and the vast majority of us certainly weren't. But we still have to. We have to have the conversation so we can move that way. Because most of my life now is we get up as early as we can in the morning and we pray all day until 9 o'clock at night. And we pray because those amongst our people who believe that prayer is the most powerful way to bring about change, because we're facing into stuff to do with climate change and other stuff, which is existential. And one of the ways that we think, and we pray, and then we go food, and food shows up, and then we pray more, and pray more, and pray more. And one of the ways that people like Alison would have said that we can change the world is if we conceive our children consciously this way, within 2 generations, we would have a world of love. And that's it. So it is a solution. It is a solution that would work. It's exceeding challenge.
Well, Carmen says, I wish my son had seen you instead of the doctors he saw. Thank you, Aidan, for showing that there's another side to healing mental illness.
You're very, very welcome.
And Pat says, why is it always the mothers that get the blame? I feel bad for them. They're always blamed for serial killers.
Yeah. And exactly, there's two people. It takes 2 people to bring a child and conceive a child into the world. And
yes, I'm just glad that I haven't got 2 serial killers, so otherwise I'd be feeling really bad. So Philosophical Phoenix says, yes, my parents were in a cult where the roots of my complex PTSD came to life and grew. Eventually self-perpetuated because it was what was familiar. Yeah.
And it's very difficult when you're caught in a delusional system. And we have that here, where when a person is an individual and you have delusion about the world, those delusions are in service of your recovery. When you are in a shared delusional system with others, those delusions are no longer in the service of individuals within that. They form their own delusional system, and they're in the service of nobody. I accept that there can be other things going on here of a darker nature. I accept that too.
Okay, and Joan doesn't agree with you that parents are responsible for all mental illnesses. Okay. So
I would agree, I would agree with you. Parents aren't responsible for all. I would agree with
that. Celine says, this is interesting. My mom was a big child, but she made everything up. She made everything up later in life, so she must have grown up. So I think it's lovely to, whatever relationship you had with your parents or with your children, that, with time, years, experience, and acquired wisdom, that parents and their children can come to some accommodation, recognizing I didn't have the perfect child, I didn't have the perfect parents, nor was I a perfect child or a perfect parent, but some some kind of resolution, that there's a kind of compassion and acceptance.
Absolutely. I was talking to somebody quite recently there, and she was just saying she would be in her late 50s, and she was just saying she had one of her first child she had when she was very young, about 18, and she was in a relationship. She was terrible, and I did not want to be pregnant. I didn't want, I wanted to be out partying, riding all around me. That's what I wanted to be doing. And she went to her son, and she's, and she talked to him, and she shared, and she said, I'm sorry, I fucked up. And you should see the 2 of them together. Yeah. There's no question about him turning on her, or, he's no time for his father. His father fucked it off. It's just about, but there's no sense of turning on her. It's, that's life, and thank you so much for sharing. And you can see the love that's there between them now. It's wonderful to see. Great. And this ability, we mentioned earlier, the ability to bring around change in our children, irrespective of what age they are, is huge for them. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we were all sitting here, some of our parents are alive, and they all walked in and they sat in front of me and said, we really, really love you. And that's our truth.
Not said often enough, I think.
No. I mean, you can't lie either, of course, but,
No.
But it's not about beating the shit out of people. I mean, I think about a woman overseas, and, when her child was in utero, she wanted to try to abort her child and all this sort of stuff. And I said, and it was an emergency situation. and her child was going to later on. Sorry, emergency situation. Her child was an adult. That was in relation to.
Come closer to the phone. Can you repeat that?
And her child was a young adult.
Yeah.
And it was an emergency situation in terms of not eating. And, so she came and they said, well, first thing we do here is, you write the history of your child from before she was conceived. And she said, and I said, you get a sense of it. I said it was difficult back then. I said, yeah, it was very violent. Really, she was conceived in rain. I wanted to hide the pregnancy. I wanted to get rid of her. I wanted to get rid of her. And I said, there's no judgment here. You're here, and she was very upset. You're here, but you're here going, I'm gonna make this. That's what you're doing. I'm gonna make this better. So, because it's an emergency situation, you're going, what do you think is right? But you have to be more directive. So it said, what you could do if it feels right is you would ask her to lie. Saying, I was thinking about it, and just lie with her, and just these experiences very early on are very difficult. Just lie. And she said, I lay with her. I started talking, and my daughter said, it's okay, man. It's okay. And within 2 weeks, the young person come out of that difficulty.
Wow.
And there's no judgment of this parent, at all. There was no malice within her, anything like that. But she said, she went, I can bring about change here. I have the power to do this.
Brilliant. Liz says, reassured by this discussion to know that there are other fellow medical practitioners out there trying to do good despite our dysfunctional systems. That's really nice, Liz.
And the guy talking about those men and women earlier on working in psychiatry, it's very difficult. It's very you're talking. People are in whistleblowing situations almost when they try and put their head up above the parapet.
Yeah.
Very difficult.
And the medical system is you do what you're told. It's very hierarchical, and it's very, very hard to argue. And I suppose in the last 3 years, when people came out with alternative narratives around how the pandemic was managed, silenced and cancelled and all of that. So it's such a pity. Philosophical Phoenix says, this has given me hope. So happy to have caught some of this. And Helen Gray says, very true. We don't have to carry our past abuse. We can relearn and do things different.
Yeah.
I think accepting allows the pain to get strong enough to change the cycle. Lovely. Yeah.
The living truth, the accepting and living truths is transformative for many of us.
If Celine says, I feel you yourself as a grown-up should come to terms with your upbringing. Yeah, well, we absolutely. And if we can get the help to do that, that's sometimes we can't do that on our own, but we could do it with an other, whoever that other may be, if it's professional or having loving people around us can be really, really corrective, just beautiful healing experiences for us. And Karen says, I think that many people are suffering trauma from the damage caused by social privations of the Industrial Revolution, Victorian, and the 2 world wars. And the damage passes down and affects down the generations until the person recognizes what's happening and says enough.
Yeah. One of the things is stuff that's held within the cultural unconscious for people. And that's, it parallels what you're saying there, which is transgenerational phenomenon. In the UK, it varies depending on the country, what part of the UK, what's held in cultural unconscious, and then there's specific things here in Ireland as well that are held, but they are very, very painful. They can be very painful. They can be very challenging.
Yeah. Simon says, I'm a 45-year-old man and have been estranged from my mother for over 14 years. Probably the best decision I've ever made to step away. Moving on from toxic family members is so important for self-preservation. I realized my life got better after I broke away. And you see, there's no hard and fast rule. For some, there is no remedy. And you take yourself out of that situation and you take care of yourself. So absolutely, Simon. And then for others who are able to somehow it can happen, but it's not for everybody.
Yeah, because you're back again to self-directed life, living, self-directed healthcare. So what people are doing then is you have that, what feels right and appropriate for me, and then you have other people sharing about their own experiences, but not telling you should live like that. Just sharing because it can be helpful. But absolutely, you have to decide honestly with yourself what feels right.
So, now, because we're coming to the end of our time, and I would love you to share that piece you did at our night court a few weeks back, but please come close to the phone so that people can hear it. I don't want them to miss anything.
I won't be able to share that.
Okay, all right, but you will do one.
Yes, I will do. Again, they're in a piece of show. Tá deis or foil a bit ag éisteach fum. At the end of this piece, there's an opportunity to hear that sound. As many of our people know, when Mother Mary and Father Joseph were involved in a form of spiritual development which was related to the use of sexual energy for personal development. And it was in the context of this that they approached the conception of Jesus and Christ. Over time, given the context that they were in, it was their sexuality was born with a heaviness. In contrast to this was Mary Magdalene, who wore her sensuality and sexuality with a lightness that's like being at sea under sail. I remember Mary Magdalene, you approached the east, as you usually do, and you came and you sat amongst our people.
Come closer to the phone.
And you invited us, Mary Magdalene, to prayer. I remember you looked down upon the little boy who sat on his way to a big throne, who looked up upon you and said, Mary Mags, Mary Mags, Mary Mags, you never come alone. You never come alone, and you never come alone for me. Ná bí búrtha faoi sin mar bhúcail, ná bí búrtha faoi sin. Tá tú is jing on in mo crí honest, tá tú is jing in mo crí honest, tá tú is jing in mo crí honest. Good job. And later that day, when we sat in pretend circle and pretend prayer, you came from the East, Mary Magdalene. You came from the East like you usually do. You came with your consort and you came with your lover, and you danced for us the dance of all that is and all that is not. And you danced for us the ribbon dance of our identity, and you danced for us your invitation. And I felt your hand upon my shoulder and whispered in my ear, be still now, my lover, and still your hand. And then Aran Clay Akulane, I heard on the left, I heard it come. I heard that violent, vicious word that is adulterous. And then I felt your hand, Mary Magdalene, come through my heart, and you bent and whispered in my ear, we will hold in our heart, my lover, we will hold in my heart forever. We will hold our sisters and their children, and we will hold them forever in our heart. And then you stood, my lover, and you walked to the old woman who took your hand in her, yours, the hand of every sister that ever was and ever will be. And you bent and you whispered into her ear, into the ear of eternity, we will hold my sister, we will hold my sister in Mary Magdalene's heart. We will hold our sisters and their children. And we will hold them forever, that they may know love, and they may know love and acceptance forever. And then you ate, and we stood in circle round our people like we usually do, and intertwined our arms and merged our energy to protect you from the darkness that seeps in through the crevices of your own grounded self, that seeps into the crevice of your own grounded self and poisons you and through you and others with the only sin that ever is and ever was, the sin of separation. And now, my lover, our dance is over, and now, my lover, our dance begins. We will dance together, my lover, the dance of all that is and all that is not. And we will dance, my lover, the dance, the rhythm dance, all that is and all that is not. And we shall dance, my lover, forever, forever and a day.
Wow. Thank you.
And to remember our sisters who were sent to places to launder themselves sins that never are.
Thank you. I have a friend, Maureen, whose book is out this week called The Girl in the Tunnel. When she was 12, she was put into both an industrial school and a laundry at 12 because her stepfather was sexually abusing her. So her book is out this week, The Girl in the Tunnel. So thank you for that. But lovely comments here. This poem is like a chant. It has so much love and compassion and grief at the same time. That was beautiful. That was just lovely. Beautiful narration, Aidan, despite the bad connection. Extremely important topics. Thank you, Aidan and Eimear. Beautiful. Linda Joan, thank you both for a brilliant conversation. Mental illness has torn apart many families. As a society, we have a long way to go to embrace and heal those who need healing. Philippa said, thank you for this evening chat. It's been helpful to understand mental health. Now, my last question, because there's people like to bet on what my guest's answer is going to be. What is your favorite season and what is your favorite festival at the Wheel of the Year?
Unfortunately.
Oh, you're frozen.
You just broke up there.
Okay. My last question. People like, can you hear me now? Can you hear me? You can't. Can you hear me?
Kind of. Yeah. Your last question.
Okay. Yeah. What is your favorite season?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. What is your favorite season and what is your favorite ceremony to mark the Wheel of the Year?
What's my favorite season and favorite ceremony?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm getting. Tell you now. I don't really have a favorite.
That's okay.
To be honest, I mean, I suppose I love the summer months. I've never really thought about it actually, so I'm not able to answer that one.
Well, Devourer of Mani. So people like. Go on, sorry. There's Devourer of Mani says spring and Lunasa for me. He said he seems like a summer sun worshipper that truly enjoys feeling the grass between his toes. I don't know how accurate that is.
Spot on. Spot on. Spot on.
Well done. Well done.
Psychics are all out.
So listen, thank you. It's just been really enjoyed. Francis says this is interesting. What I most enjoyed about this evening is it was something very real. Thank you, Aidan. And then Sandy's who'd asked you about her friend who has the psychosis. Wow, that was very deep and meaningful and heartfelt. Thank you. Many blessings from Tintagel. That's where Sandy lives. And Jill Horn says, I will walk with Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Thanks from the groundedness in me. Okay. So, Aidan, it's been just such a joy. Thank you so much for being my guest. And it was interesting. We only stuck to one topic and we could have gone on more and more and more. But anyway, we've been talking for quite a while. So lots of wonderful positive comments. So what I'll do, we can go back and look at those afterwards. So I'll let you say goodbye to everybody and then I'll send you back into the green room and then stay there and I'll come back to you once I've said goodbye.
Okay. Well, I just to thank everybody who's come this evening and to thank all our ancestors and all our energies and just that we will hold, hopefully, that we will move forward in a world which is positive and healing, that our mother will be here. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. So, okay, see you in a few secs. So, thank you all so much for coming this evening and just great comments. And as always, you and I know there were so many comments we just didn't get to because there were so many were just flying in. But I really, really appreciated your presence and your questions, comments. All of that is always important because, like I say, that's what makes these conversations so enjoyable for me and so real. And I really, really appreciate it. So I won't be here this next week, but I will be here in 2 weeks' time. So in the meantime, be well. Enjoy the rest of your evening, afternoon, morning, or if you're watching a recording of this chat. So in the meantime, slán go fóill.